Good morning and a warm welcome to everyone. My name is Devdeep and I will be moderating this morning's session. Um, our first speaker does not need an introduction. Professor Debashish Banerji will be speaking on integral sustainability and the ontology of ownership. He's the Haridas Chaudhary Professor of Indian Philosophies and Cultures and the Doshi Professor of Asian Art at CIIS. He's also the program chair for our East-West Psychology department. The schedule, the approach that we will be following this morning is at 5 minutes. I will ring a gentle bell, and at 20, I will ring it again. And this is to indicate to the speakers that the time is over. Thank you.
So the topic of my talk, as they've already introduced, is integral sustainability and the ontology of ownership. The word sustainability entered modern vocabulary from the 1970s. I think yesterday, Devdeep was also talking about the genealogy, and there's a variety of genealogies, but this is one modern genealogy of the word sustainability. From this period, it was tied to ecological concerns and an awareness of detrimental human impacts on the Earth's resources, leading to disruptions in the tenuous ecological balance with its capacity to maintain life. Over the next decades, the introduction of terms like climate change and global warming brought greater specificity to the conditions and stakes for sustainability, locating it fundamentally in factors of human intervention in the planet's functioning, such as the depletion of fossil fuels, the accumulation of pollutants serving a toxic function for living systems on Earth and water, and the accumulation of carbon in the ozone layer of the Earth's atmosphere, forming a greenhouse effect and leading to a climate crisis. By the year 2000, the term Anthropocene gained currency in the sustainability discourse, popularized by Paul J. Crutzen to designate a new geologic era, the era of the human, when the human footprint defined the Earth's behavior. By this time, the awareness of the damage done to the Earth, the increasing stretches of toxic wasteland, the rapid depletion of biodiversity, the extinction of increasing numbers of life forms, the health hazards of pollutants, and the climate consequences of global warming were alarmingly evident to a greater number of humans, even while a significant portion of the Earth's population remained oblivious to these effects or held them to be distant facts, seen and heard of remotely as in newspapers and on television as the realities of others. These others were, of course, the less privileged people of our times, people of the developing and underdeveloped worlds, or the ruined peoples of colonial history who served as the dumping grounds of the developed world or lacked the technological infrastructure to ward off the encroaching effects of development. By the second decade of the 21st century, the effects of global warming were increasingly every man's companion. Wildfires, floods, tsunamis, earthquakes, landslides, hurricanes, and snowstorms striking frequently and at short notice across the world. Though as expected, the worst effects such as loss of home, health, and life continued to be experienced by the least privileged, it was impossible to think of climate disaster as someone else's problem. And global efforts to contain and reverse the situation became the talk of various international environmental summits. It was clear from these summits that the wheels of development greased by capital were loath to slow down or could accept only patchwork compromise solutions that didn't lighten the pockets. By 2015, many analysts felt that we had crossed the point of no return. It was no longer a question of if climate disaster would drive us to extinction, but when. Others felt there was slim hope, but critical need for urgent action if catastrophe was to be avoided. It would seem that the Anthropocene meant that the human footprint had lengthened to cover the globe. But perhaps a better way to see it is that the globe had shrunk to fit the human footprint. The mystery of the world drained, its imaginative potential reduced to an enumeration of resources waiting to be ordered for human exploitation and pleasure, what Heidegger has referred to as standing reserve, as Devdeep pointed out yesterday. But it also meant that the world was inextricably interdependent. Whatever happened to the other had its impact on ourselves quicker than we could think. The luxury of privilege remained, but became increasingly tenuous and unpredictable. The definition of sustainability thus could no more be restricted to the climate disaster waiting to happen, but had to include all that disturbed the fabric of our planetary coexistence. From 2020, an event not dependent directly on the climate took center stage in shaking the foundations of our global existence, the pandemic of COVID-19, which is with us still. It inaugurated the disruption of the biosphere at its most fundamental genetic level. Undoubtedly, the disruption of the geosphere, which has led to climate crisis, has affected the biosphere in its ecological interdependence to an alarming degree. But what the pandemic represented was the direct disruption of the biosphere, the denaturalization of genetic structure, and the border crossing of genetic information outside of natural determinations. Though not directly caused by human tampering, of course, that's a question, that's still a question mark. It was characteristic of a temporal culture of genetic experimentation where the human mind has turned its attention to the utilization and exploitation of life through destructuring and restructuring at its most fundamental material basis. But if sustainability is threatened in our times at the levels of the geosphere and the biosphere, we have unleashed potential dangers of an even greater disruptive power at the level of the psychosphere, the domains of behavior, culture, and politics. The destruction of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City on 9th September 2001 inaugurated an era of global destabilization due to culture wars. A vision of the post-national future that this portends can be imagined from the title and contents of Benjamin Barber's book, Jihad versus Macworld, a pitting of fundamentalist cultisms of various kinds against hegemonic neoliberal globalization driven by capital in a lawless world. Or, as in our present hour in the political sphere, the internal forces of racism, cultism, and corporate greed seek desperately to displace the values of democracy. Or in the geopolitical sphere, we are poised on the verge of a prolonged condition which has the makings of a world war waged between democracy in a three-piece suit and populist nationalisms headed by dictators or elected strongmen. Behind all these dystopian, unsustainable scenarios, modernity with its faith in human reason continues its claim for the future for human destiny. Science and technology will save us. The pharmaceutical corporations or the military industrial complex or the green revolution or white revolution or biotechnological revolutions will save us. Cyber technology has brought us a humanist apotheosis. We are omniscient. Encyclopedic knowledge is available at the press of a button. We are omnipotent. Remote action of unimaginable power is available at the press of a button. We are omnipresent. We lead non-local lives, contacting any point in the world in real time. We stand on the verge of immortality, dreaming of an extropian or transhuman continuation of our memory capacities in indestructible bodies with unthinkable data processing speed and power. But all this notwithstanding, our dystopian, unsustainable world stops us in our tracks again and again, more and more frequently, signaling to an incapacity under all this bravado. To address our problems of unsustainability, piecemeal and patchwork solutions will not succeed. We must think of them all at once as a single problem with varied phylogenetic manifestations. This is an integral approach. What is the problematic that these problems are signs of? Since the human is at the center of them all, it is the image of the human that we must consider. The image of the human, normalized and universalized by modernity, crystallizes itself through the European Enlightenment in the form of the rational being. It is the rebirth, renaissance of the Aristotelian classification of the human as a rational animal. According to Aristotle, the human is an animal with logos. That is, an animal distinguished from other animals by its rationality, a soul of reason. Here, this distinguishing feature becomes the identity of the human, centered, as in Aristotle, in the male, and by extension of its founding culture, rational Western white male, logocentric, Eurocentric, and androcentric. This image has normalized itself through colonialism and universalized itself institutionally through the knowledge academy, the world market, and the nation state. What we must recognize about this image is its ontological foundation in the laws of logic. By the law of non-contradiction, one takes oneself to be real and all others as unreal or secondarily real. By the law of the excluded middle, there is no true intersubjectivity between the self and the other. Between the self and all its others is the relation of the subject and the object, an objectification of the world and all its beings and entities. This is why Sri Aurobindo refers to the rational age of modernity as the age of individualism, an age marked by alienation. We may ask whether such a rational objectification did not belong to pre-modern or non-Western humans. To answer this question, we may turn our attention to ecosystems of non-human life forms that maintain themselves within and across species by an intelligence of conservation. We recognize this by talking, for example, of swarm intelligence or herd intelligence within collectives of species and of ecosystemic homeostasis in communities of coexisting species. Bound by the laws of logic, the entry of the human mind into this condition introduces a subjective dissociation from this instinctive collective intelligence of conservation. As phenomenologists such as Husserl and Merleau-Ponty have observed, the mind is discontinuous from the life world, and in this negative way, transcendent and alien to it, capable only of indirect knowledge. Yet indigenous and pre-modern peoples have expressed a closer instinctive kinship with the cyclic life of nature. It is not as if these peoples lack the mind, but rather the relation of mind with the non-mental capabilities of the human and other life forms was not one of an exclusivity and superiority, but rather one of a coexistence and instrumentality at the service of a deeper unity. Modernity's relation has become, as Habermas names it, a colonization of the life world. The instinct for unity, to the transcendent dissociated mind, for which individuals are atomized to a radical separation, expresses as the seeking for ownership. It is this seeking, moderated by social contracts, that forms the ontology of modernity. A displacement of the dualism and relationship of property possession between creator and creature in the Abrahamic traditions, the modern rational subject tries to consolidate its existence through the ownership, exploitation, and enjoyment of its world and all its others at various calibrated distances from itself. This is why modernity's ontology can properly be called an ontology of ownership. The attempt to own and dominate the earth, the world of life, or cultures other than one's own, and ultimately the right to own and define oneself through property, forms this ontology of ownership. Deployed systematically and competitively as in our times, it has led to the unsustainable world we live in. Rationality also drives its others into hiding when it can't own them, waiting their hour to claim this world. The crisis of sustainability provides that opportune moment. Given this understanding, it is the image of the human of post-Enlightenment modernity, the human of the ontology of ownership, the rational Western human of humanism that is unsustainable. It is the metaphysical foundation of this image that needs questioning and discarding. A metaphysics of integral monism must replace the rational exclusivity, superiority, atomicity, dualism, and objectifying identity of humanism. Haridas Chaudhuri indicates the essence of an integral monism by pointing to the verse pertaining to wholeness in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which we've been hearing for the last 2 days. Purna mada, purna midam, purnat purna mudachyate, purnasya purna madaya, purnam eva vashishyate. That is the whole, this is the whole. From the whole emerges. If we take the whole from the whole, it is the whole verily that remains. According to this metaphysics, the inexhaustible whole dwells in each of us just as we dwell in the inexhaustible whole. Through deep contemplation, it is possible to realize this truth. A field of life based on such a realization would make for a very different kind of civilization than that of a rational humanism with its ontology of ownership. Here, there is no ownership of the other. The other here is not just other humans. Sorry. Here, there is no ownership of the other. There is the experience of another horizon of the self in the other. The other here is not just other humans, but all others of earth and heaven. A collective field of such a realization is the foundation of an integrally sustainable civilization. Such a civilization operates from a concrete sense of its unity with all other realities. In that sense, it is similar to the indigenous or pre-modern, but unlike them, it does not eschew technology. Technology, too, in the use of an integral consciousness, takes on the transformed condition of techne, an aspect of poiesis. These are the technologies of the harmonized self-relations of the one and the technologies of becoming the integral self, where our organs are engines of becoming, yantra, and our external engines are organs of transformation. This turn implies a praxis of intuition which inverts the epistemological apparatus in favor of an experience of the unborn self at one's core. As Ari Bergson indicated, what is required for this is a praxis of intuition that belongs to a post-rational phylogenetic rung in comparison to the instinct of animal conservation. It is not a return to the herd, but a deeper individual subjectivism, which leads to a personal and unique access to the whole. In the mother's words, a Gnostic or supramental community can exist only on the basis of the inner realization of each of its members, each one realizing his real concrete unity and identity with all the other members of the community. That is, each one should feel not like just one member united in some way with all the others, but all as one within himself. For each one, the others must be himself as much as his own body, and not mentally and artificially, but by a fact of consciousness, by an inner realization. To transit from a civilization marked by the universal norm of a rational humanism and an ontology of ownership to an integrally sustainable civilization, what is needed are experimental fields of collective realization. The mother founded Auroville to be such a field of collective praxis, leading to integral realization at all levels, such as those of the geosphere, the biosphere, and the psychosphere. But such a field will always remain vulnerable to appropriation by the ontology of ownership from within and without, until there is a critical mass of realization among the inhabitants. A theoretical understanding of the need for such a metaphysics, praxis, and goal of becoming can also help to avert misappropriation. Presently, Auroville is in a fledgling state where neither a core collective realization nor a clear theoretical understanding of its purpose among its members are developed enough to resist state appropriation. In a similar move in 1968, the year of Auroville's founding, the California Institute of Integral Studies was founded to research into and develop the theoretical understanding of a praxis of integral consciousness as a way out of the imprisonment of the ontology of ownership. To maintain its aim, CIIS needs to avoid a false understanding of the term integral, which places it under an additive rational impulse, instead of keeping its sights on the metaphysics of pre-existent wholeness, which dwells in all beings and things. This is the big mistake. Integral is not mental and vital and emotional or this and that and the other. It is not an addition of properties. It has first to be sought in and by itself. That is the field of studies. In a seeking for expansion, such a mistaken trajectory leading to dilution at best and fascism at worst. These false subjectivism may threaten to usurp the destiny of the Institute. It is hoped that the true field of integral studies may strengthen and grow so as to overcome such dangers.
Thank you, Debashish, with my heart. Now, the ontology of ownership is also working in a contested field in modernity. So, with respect, I draw our attention to many movements in the modern world, for example, Ruskin and Peter Kropotkin, who have inspired a whole set of cooperative movements and different relationship to self and property. This is my first submission, which also requires a rethinking of the ontological itself. Even with Heidegger, with his error of an early Heidegger ontology of mastery, accompanied by an ontology of pathos and secondness, my submission, therefore, is critique of ontology of ownership also invites a plurality of the ontological And today, how do we cultivate that ontological as a pathos of secondness and sharing? And in terms of monism, integral monism, but the challenge in terms of how do we think of an integral monism, which is also integral plural, and both of them, not just in the sense of noun, for example, integral pluralization and a kind of monism as a process. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ananta. So to your first question, yes, undoubtedly, there are many forms of critique within the ontology of ownership that have arisen. And when you're talking about Heidegger, the notion of ownership changing to trusteeship, what he called being the shepherd of the earth, comes to mind. But there is still a separation there. And these are good ideals. This is the problem, the psychological problem. All these nice ideals fail when actually confronted with our psychological complexity and the difficulty of helping ourselves. We are our own worst enemies in a helpless kind of way. It's not that we choose to be our worst enemies. There is a psychological failure because we don't know. This all comes from the transcendence of the mind. The mind can posit its goals, but cannot achieve them. You see? So that's one aspect. That's the reason for the need for finding that wholeness, which is at another level, another dimension than the dimension of the constitution of our psychology. Secondly, to your that very beautiful point about that the monism, the ontology of monism. I didn't develop it, but the whole idea of an integral monism is a monism that operates at a plane which the rational cannot understand because it is paradoxically simultaneously plural and one. So the discovery of that kind of a plane, that is the field of studies, both in terms of a praxis in a collective. That is what Auroville is. How can one discover the one in the many? And in a theoretical spelling out of new theoretical foundations as the opportunity of a different kind of academy, which CIIS set out to be. So I think it's critical to understand an ontology of monism in those terms, which are paradoxically plural and one at the same time, and discover the one in the many through arriving at a plane which is superior to mind in that sense, overcomes the logic, the laws of logic by which the mind is bound.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We have another time for another question. Yes.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was very important, especially to mention ownership for Auroville, where everyone tries to own it in some way or another. And at the end, it came to the government of India to solve the problem, the issue of ownership in Auroville, to take over. Well, the Aurovillians themselves gave it back to, they couldn't manage it without ownership. And I remember we fought with this very much. And Mother actually defined that she didn't want one thing, two things she didn't want. One is drugs, and second is money exchange. That means we have to relate in the community not through money, but through consciousness. So the whole money and ownership had to be taken away from the relations between people in the community, that they could develop new, totally new relations which were never developed before. But we failed, of course. We created financial service, we created maintenance, which is the biggest failure. It's a small money paid to everyone. Some people have maintenance, some don't. Some people have to work somewhere outside. So it was a total failure of Auroville. And bringing this back on this philosophical ground of rationality as the support for ownership is a very important issue. and we have to look into it again. So I'm very grateful to you for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. I'd like to say I won't jump to the conclusion that we have failed. I would say that it's a difficult transition, and I equally appreciate your talk yesterday, where you actually draw. I mean, what I'm saying is very complimentary to the fact that you're drawing out what is the inner process necessary. I mean, talking about process, that's what Ananta's question was regarding the process of the pluralism of monism. That is the process of karma yoga, really. And the engagement of that, as you pointed out, through the equality of encountering otherness and bringing it into relation with the deepest core of the integral. And I think that praxis is really what is required. And that's why I point out, we haven't reached that critical mass of practice. There isn't a sufficient understanding of what it requires. And so this core, that's where the complementarity of something like CIIS and a field of practice like Auroville comes in. There is necessary a base of understanding, of research, of introspection, of the mind's acceptance of its responsibility in this transition. And if that is not done, then you're vulnerable to your own foibles. You don't really know where you're going. I think that's...
Okay, I think we'll proceed.